CBS Sports' Tom Fornelli calls Syracuse football a sleeper candidate to make the college football playoff in 2024. He cited 4 reasons, but before we get to the 4 reasons, I want to quickly explain how the college football playoff is going to work for next year, because it's a little bit different than in years past, and there's a reason why people are optimistic about this upcoming season, about their chances of making the playoff, because it's a little different. So, in years past, it was 4 teams. That was after it used to just be 2 teams, and before that, it was 1 team. It used to be 4 teams, and it was judged on an arbitrary process. There was no way to really automatically qualify for it. The committee would just take the 4 best teams they deemed, or the 4 with the best resume, whatever you want to call it, but they would only take 4. Okay, they would only take 4 teams. Next year, it's going to be 12. And there's only 5 automatic qualifiers. So you got the Big 4, Power 4 conference champions, right? So the ACC is included in that, the Big 12, and then, of course, you got the top dogs in the SEC and the Big 10. So the conference winners get an automatic bid, and there will be, I believe, 1 Group of 5 team. The highest-ranked Group of 5 team will also get into the college football playoff for next season. So then after that, there's 7 additional wild card spots for a total of 12 teams in the college football playoff next season. So that's why really there is a discussion about Syracuse football having a chance to make the playoff, because even though I am a Syracuse homer, if it was only 4 teams, there's no chance. 0 chance they would have made it. But now that it's 12, that's why they're now a sleeper candidate. So here are the 4 reasons why Tom Fornelli calls Syracuse football a sleeper. I'm going to dive into them. Number 1, he said an upgrade at quarterback with McCord over Shrader. I happen to agree with him on that. While I do believe that Garrett Shrader was a better quarterback than we think, Kyle McCord is an upgrade over him. Plain and simple. He is. Garrett Shrader was solid. He had a floor. He had a ceiling. He can guide you to a bowl game, which is respectable in college football. Getting to a bowl game, 2 bowl games in 3 years is pretty good. But he was never going to take you to that next tier. And Kyle McCord is someone who I believe next season can take them to the next tier. So that can mean from just a 6-7 win bowl team to perhaps 8 to 9 wins. That's the difference between Kyle McCord and Garrett Shrader. He can buy you 1 to 2, maybe even 3 more wins than you otherwise would have had. So I agree with him. Kyle McCord is definitely an upgrade over Garrett Shrader, and upgrading at quarterback is going to improve your team. Number 2, he cited a deeper wide receiver room, particularly with the upgrades of, or the additions in the transfer portal of Justus, Ross-Simmons, and Zeed Haynes. He didn't mention Jackson Meeks in the article, but Jackson Meeks is there as well. We talked about the wide receiver room a few days ago on this podcast. I think it is deeper. It is much improved. There's better high-end talent as well, because the guys that were starting last season that are still there are going to have to fight to get on the field because of all the guys that they added, like a Jackson Meeks and a Justus Ross-Simmons and a Zeed Haynes. Those might be the 3 best receivers on the team for next season, all of them coming from the transfer portal. So I do agree with Tom Fornelli on that Syracuse football has upgraded the wide receiver room, upgraded the quarterback room. He then mentioned Oronde Gadsden coming back from injury, and LaQuint Allen still being there certainly helps round out the weaponry, so to speak. I think Oronde Gadsden is the best weapon on the team, as well as, well, you'll have to tune in for Poll Friday tomorrow for who I think is the best player on the team right now. But regardless, Oronde Gadsden, one of the best on the team. And LaQuint Allen, a 1,000-yard back in a Power 4 conference, is really solid. And finally, the schedule. The friendly schedule that we all are pretty much aware of by now. Tom Fornelli mentioned that at NC State and Miami are probably the toughest games on Syracuse's schedule. Can't really argue against that. Miami at home, I think, is the toughest out of all of them, just because while Miami underachieves every single year, their athletes are really good, right? They get NFL prospects, They get the best high school recruits. They get really solid transfers in the portal. They just never win, really, because, well, they have a terrible head coach. Mario Cristobal stinks as a head coach. But regardless, how Syracuse is going to match up, particularly in the trenches against Miami, could be a real concern. That's why I think it's the hardest game on the schedule. And then at NC State is a tough one, too. But with all that being said, ESPN recently released who they think has the easiest schedules in the Power Four, and Syracuse came in first, meaning that ESPN thinks that Syracuse football has the easiest schedule in the Power Four next season. You have an easy schedule. You upgraded the roster clearly. Fran Brown has done an excellent job bringing in some dudes. I can see why he thinks that this could be a sleeper team for next season to make the college football playoff. You have 12 teams, right? You have 12 teams, so it makes a lot of sense. Now, as far as that, those are his 4 points. Now, from my perspective, here's why I think it makes some sense to call them a sleeper. I mentioned the college football playoff having 12 teams. I looked at the poll last year on the AP poll. I looked at that. And I looked at it heading into or after conference championship weekend. I was able to sort it for after that week. And when I looked at it, in order to get into the top 12 by the end of the season, the team needs to win at least 9 games. You need to win at least 9 games in order to be considered for the college football playoff next season, which is going to be 12. You have to win at least 9, probably closer to 10. If I'm being completely honest with you, probably 10. Okay, but 9 to 10 is where you need to be considered for the playoffs. So when I look at Syracuse's schedule, I think there's a pretty solid argument to be had that they're gonna start 4-0 in all likelihood, right? You got Ohio at home. They should win that game, right? Don't have a letdown in week 1. They got Georgia Tech at home, which I said is not an opponent that we should take lightly, but they are at home. They should be able to win that game. Stanford at home should be a win. And then Holy Cross, you're playing all your backups by the second quarter, right? So you should be 4-0. So then it's a matter of, in their final 8 games, can they win 6 of them to be considered for the college football playoff? You got at UNLV, at NC State, at Pitt, Virginia Tech at home, at Boston College, at Cal, UConn, and Miami. Those are the final 8 games of the season. They're probably going to have to win 6 of them to have a chance at making the college football playoff. There's no Clemson or Florida State on the schedule, of course, right? They're not playing against North Carolina with Drake May, so that's not an automatic loss. It's a pretty easy schedule, as ESPN has said. It's an easy schedule. Plain and simple. Now, the flip side to that is that can actually work against Syracuse. It can work against them because that's factored in by the committee. Who you play matters. Not saying it's Syracuse's fault that that's how the ACC schedule was drawn up this season. But if it's between 10-win Syracuse and a 10-win SEC team to get into the college football playoff, that's where it could become a concern. I'm just putting it out there. It can work against you if you have an easy schedule, even if you do meet that win threshold of probably 9 to 10. The safest bet, win the ACC. You get an automatic berth. Don't think they're going to do that, but that's the safest bet. Regardless, there is that path to winning 9 to 10 games next year to at least get into the conversation for the college football playoff. I agree that the offense is looking so much better on paper. You got LaQuinn Allen back, Oronde Gadsden back from injury. Dan Villari is still there. So you have one of the better tight end units in the country. We all like that. And we did go over the receiver room. I already mentioned that. Plus the defense. You were able to retain Marlowe Wax, Justin Barron, Elijah Clark, Jaden Bellamy. Derek McDonald is still there. So you got retained starters. In another year, they should be better. Fran Brown is a defensive head coach, if you want to call him that. Defense first, right? He was a DB coach at Georgia. You brought in Fadil Diggs, Deuce Chestnut, all those other transfers. You're certainly a more experienced team. There's a reason why people are saying that this team could be a sleeper for the college football playoff next season. Once again, Tom Fornelli of CBS Sports called Syracuse a sleeper for the college football playoff, which is going to be 12 teams next season. Now, coming up, I'm going to give you guys the reasonable expectations for Syracuse football, because while I would love for them to make the college football playoff, and I'm rooting for them to do it, heck, I'm rooting for them to win the national championship. How about that? I want this team to win the national championship. Is that a reasonable expectation, though? Like, should we expect Syracuse football to make the playoff? We're going to talk about it right after this.